America's most consumed sport, football, for now, is on top of the sports food chain. With the NFL being firmly established nearly a century ago in 1920, the game has grown into a global product that features insane athleticism, deep levels of strategy, and billions of dollars into the hands of wealthy owners. What is also interesting about the sport is that it is played largely only in the United States of America and relatively confined to a small group of young, active participants. Unlike other major sports throughout the world, football has really never had a world competition involving international participants. Hockey, basketball, soccer, and even baseball have all been in the Olympics. The NFL claims the Super Bowl is a world championship, however, the Americans win it every year. But where did this beautiful game of football come from? And who is largely responsible for inventing the game? Every sport has an origin story, and most aren't as simple as basketball, which was essentially invented by one man who didn't really think much farther ahead than putting a basket on a pole. But football's origin and its crazy beginnings are a little more complicated than that. There is one man we can largely credit for being the father of the game, and we will get to him. However, let's talk about the time before his innovations changed into the game we know it today. It's obvious when looking at American football that it has origins in rugby and a little soccer. However, when coming up with a game that is definitely unique from both of these sports, an interesting set of circumstances can develop. In the mid-1800s, a modified version of soccer started to be played in the US, where players tried to kick a ball past a goal line to score. Running with or throwing the ball was prohibited. The game began to get organized and collegiate teams formed, and in 1869 the first college game was played between bitter rivals at the time, Rutgers and Princeton, though you could hardly describe the game that they played that day as football as we have come to know it. Two teams of 12 players on the field tried to kick the ball into the other's goal or end zone, but again, no throwing or picking up of the ball was allowed. The game was, however, full contact, so get it out of your head that this looked like some type of wussy soccer game. This is America we're talking about here. Rutgers would end up winning the game 6-4. And an insane play that would change the course of the game was invented that day, which I will also talk about later. Princeton and Rutgers had agreed to play a series of games, however, after a pretty violent opening game which ended with Princeton literally being run out of town, both universities canceled the series. Football, college, and controversy, a match made in heaven. About 4 years later, in 1873, Harvard University started a squad but had trouble finding other teams to play. In 1874, they decided to invite a team from McGill University of Montreal, yes, in Canada, to play a game of football in Massachusetts. But in the pre-game warm-up, the Americans noticed the Canadians were playing an entirely different game. In their version, they were able to run with the ball. I guess in 1874, all they could do was send a letter to Canada via horseback and hope the other team showed up on the right day, So sending them a blurry photo of how they play the game would also be a waste of time, I guess. Anyways, the teams agreed to play one game of each version of what they thought was football, and thus the seeds of the modern game were born, as the Harvard guys liked the Canadian version better. And before the Canadians try and take credit for football, easy there, Moose Lover. Go enjoy your free healthcare and your Molson Ice. I got this covered. From here, the game spread as Harvard took the revised game to Yale, and then other schools started to get in on the action. I wonder how many years it took before the first illegal payoff in the college game happened. Maybe a promising athlete's dad was offered a generous incentive such as 2 high-producing dairy cows. We'll never know. Also, the Canadians went back to playing their version of football that evolved into this bizarro version of football with the huge end zones and all. The Yale-Harvard rivalry began to grow, and from this battle of stuffy rich guys, the man credited with inventing the modern game would originate. As an undergraduate at Yale from 1876 to 1881, Walter Camp served as the team's halfback and captain, essentially the team's coach. Camp was from New Britain, Connecticut, and studied medicine. More important than that, from 1881 on, Camp was the driving force behind several key rule changes to football that included the establishment of the line of scrimmage, the system of the downs where a team lost the ball after a certain amount of attempts and gain of territory, the making of the squads from 12 to 11 players, the invention of the QB position, the reduction of the pitch to the gridiron size we see now, offensive signal calling, and the scoring system concept that is used today. Essentially, under his guidance and suggestions, Camp turned the game from what looked like a battle royal with a ball into the slower, more dramatic and controlled game we see today. But not quite. We'll get back to Camp in a little bit. One key rule change would not come along for nearly 25 years after Camp's rule changes, and that was the forward pass, which was introduced in 1906, and really the forward pass wasn't invented to make the game more fun. It was invented to save lives. So by 1905, football had gotten really dangerous. In fact, 19 players had died from playing the game that year alone. Most of the problems stemmed from the play I alluded to earlier, the wedge play, which by now had become the flying wedge, in which players on both sides would form a Mad Max level juggernaut and collide somewhere on the field in a catastrophic hell yeah, which probably looked a lot like a scene from GTA, but also usually resulted in a death or two. And in 1905, Theodore Roosevelt, the President of the United States at the time, urged the NCAA to make the game safer. It has been said that Roosevelt threatened to shut the game down if it wasn't made safer. However, that's never been proven, and he wouldn't have the authority to do so anyways. In late 1905, 62 schools got together and worked to make the game more life-friendly, and thus both the organization we have come to love, known as the NCAA, was formed, and the forward pass was made legal. Also, the wedge and mass formation plays were banned. In 1906, the rules were further defined to make 7 people on the line of scrimmage. Interlocking plays where players literally locked arms and clothesline people were banned. So when your wife asks you for the millionth time what an illegal shift or offsides penalty is during the most critical time of the game, just tell her it's a rule for player safety, babe, and then pray for silence. From here, the innovations began, like the huddle, and coaches such as Pop Warner and Newt Rockne developing strategies that are still being used today and made both of them household names. And speaking of household names, why hasn't Walter Camp enjoyed the legendary status others have achieved? By all accounts, he was a humble and noble servant of the game and did his part to promote it. Much of the game that we see today is because of Walter Camp and his inventions, but not much homage is paid to him. And for you history buffs out there who will refute me on this, he certainly isn't a household name like Vince Lombardi. He is in the Collegiate Hall of Fame, which wasn't established until 2014. Not much of him is celebrated in the NFL, even though he was actually alive when it first started. He's definitely not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame either, since the NFL seems to think nothing happened before they were invented. There is the Walter Camp Football Foundation, which gives out awards like Player of the Year, which is overshadowed by the Heisman, and the Walter Camp Man of the Year, which can be given to anyone involved in college football, like retired Buccaneer and Seminole alum Warwick Dunn, who received it last year. And so Mr. Camp is now more the subject of a Google search versus the recognition that, say, James Naismith gets, whose name is on the Hall of Fame for basketball, and Abner Doubleday, who didn't even invent baseball, whose name is on a field in Cooperstown where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. So when you're sitting on the couch feeding yourself popcorn and demanding that your team's defense be more physical, remember that you owe much of the greatness that you are watching to Walter Camp. And now it seems like it's up to Roger Goodell to mess that all up. Thank you for watching this video. I want to thank FanDuel for sponsoring this little film. FanDuel is an amazing way to play fantasy football and for you to win real money every week. Heck, every day if you want. Download the FanDuel app from the link below and use my code Touchdown87 and get a free entry into the NFL Sunday Millions contest, a $7 value with your first deposit. Again, use my code Touchdown87 and enjoy winning all that cheddar. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'm 5 Points Vids, and you made it to the end of this video.